Hello friends, it is the middle of the night and today we're going to talk about Kirby Star Allies, that game that came out like a week ago. I had it, I pre-ordered it, I was like, oh, it's a new Kirby game, I gotta play it. Because the past few Kirby games, the 2D Kirby games, have been really, really good. That started with the Return to Dreamland on the Wii, and that became quickly one of my favorite Wii games, if not my favorite Wii game. I think now I might have to say something like Fortune Street or Donkey Kong Country Returns, but the Kirby game there is still really good as well. So that's a thing. And then on the 3DS, they had two sequels. They had Kirby Triple Deluxe, which came out, and then Kirby Planet Robobot, which is probably my favorite Kirby game. So there's that. Now, this game here, basically the whole gimmick with it is that you have a bunch of co-op allies that are there with you the whole time, and they can either be controlled by CPU or they can be controlled by a friend. And if that idea... There's something on my lip down there. I just noticed. That's weird. I'll have to figure that out. If you recognize that gimmick from somewhere, it's because Return to Dreamland kind of did it, but then there's also the fact that Kirby's Return to Dreamland originally was this idea. After Kirby 64 came out, they were announcing a sequel for the GameCube, and they were like, the cool thing about this, you're going to get all these crazy allies, and you're going to do all sorts of crazy stuff with them, right? And that was the whole gimmick, and that was what they were whole advertising, and that whole business, right? And then that never happened, and then it wasn't until 2010 when Kirby's Return to Dreamland came out, and then that became what it was. And there are other Kirby games in between, but the whole deal of a console Kirby game was that the sequel to Kirby 64 was going to be this game about collaborating with your allies and all this crazy co-op business. And that game now finally came out in 2018, all of these years later. That's the whole point of the game. The question is, does that work? Fundamentally, the answer to that question is probably yes. If you're playing this with friends, it's probably going to be a good time. And the AI for these allies are surprisingly competent. In that when there's like a puzzle or something that's going on, then they'll recognize what they need to do and then help you do it. Sometimes they do it all themselves, which can be a bit of an issue, but largely I was super impressed by what the AI here was doing. Problem is that idea in itself, I don't think holds enough water to carry a full Kirby game, and that can be backed up by the fact that this game is comparatively short compared to something like Return to Dreamland, and even then, like, the entire latter half of the game is pretty much reused content. The game is split up into 4 chapters. It's structured differently than many other Kirby games, but it's split up into 4 chapters, the 4th chapter actually being the longest and taking up about, like, most of the game. Oh, now they're towing guest star. Oh, there you go. You get your little speedrun mode. And that's the... Cool. Okay, fun times. And then there's this. Aha, that's their typical post-game content that I'm not going to show on screen. Not surprised by that at all. Anyway, so... Basically, the 4th chapter is about, I want to say, a third of the entire game, and most of it is, there's one, like, original level that's fairly short, and then you go to a moon, and then you fight a boss that you've already fought before most of the time. So there's a lot of reused content in this last third of the game, and that frustrated me quite a bit. You fight basically every single boss in the game twice, with the exception of, like, 4 bosses, which is, pretty bad. All things considered, considering the fact that Kirby, the extra modes in Kirby is kind of enforcing you to replay this content already. So if you're going to go through this bonus mode here, that's the predictable bonus mode where you go through the campaign as a different character. I won't say which character, for spoiler reasons, but fairly predictable Kirby fare. But going through that and then having to play, like, the same bosses and the similar levels, like, multiple times over is just not fun. Just plain and simple not fun. And it also doesn't help that because you have all these allies with you that are playing this game computer, like, you don't really get to experience those bosses for yourself. And if you're like, no, forget the allies, I'm going to do it on my own, then the bosses just become so ridiculously hard that it's just not fun then either. So, I think those are some of the caveats you run into when you have this mechanic of you're going to play with 3 other computer characters most of the time. So that's that. So Does the concept work? I would say that it was executed here better than I expected, but I'm still not sold on the concept itself on a fundamental level. And there are a few other things too, right? When the game is designed with that in mind, then you kind of run into some issues. Where in something like Return to Dreamland or the New Super Mario Brothers or the Super Mario 3D World or Donkey Kong Country Returns Tropical Freeze, like all these platformers that came out recently that have these multiplayer, the Rayman games, these games that have multiplayer, built into them, right? The ultimate key factor there is that they're still fun to play on your own, where this game is saying no. The whole point is that you're collaborating with other people. So if you don't have other physical people, then you're going to play with the CPU and you're going to like it. And I don't think that is fun, really, to be honest. So that's that. Other problems is that this is by far the blandest level design I've seen in a Kirby game in quite a long time. There was nothing that stood out to me as being particularly creative. I just kind of went through the motions through most of my time here, which is sort of disappointing considering the fact that I have had a fairly busy week this week, full disclosure, and I kind of wanted this to be sort of like the small amount of a break I had, but it kind of turned out to be a kind of tedious slog anyway. So, hey, disclosure, I've had a busy week, so, that might affect my perception of the game. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what else. So, completion, that's another thing. So, back in Kirby's Adventure, right, if you wanted to get an extra level, you'd hit a switch in a level, and then it would unlock that secret, right? And that would pretty much be the bulk of what secrets existed in Kirby's Adventure, aside from some Easter eggs, right? But as the series sort of progressed, they sort of changed how those secrets work over time. So, I mean, in Great Cave Offensive, in Superstar, you had that where you were just collecting a bunch of stuff, and when you collected everything, then you beat the game, basically. So you keep going in circles until you got everything. In Kirby's Dream Land 3, it was about, like, helping people. So you run into a thing and you need to help them. If you didn't have the tool to help them, then too bad. In Kirby 64, it was about, they had these ability combos, which sort of return here, but they're a bit different. And basically there are certain blocks and things that you could destroy or do to get the crystal shards, the namesake thing of the game. And then if you got all of them, you would get to the actual end of the game. So that game actually demanded 100% completion in order to actually finish, to some degree. The boss that exists before the final boss is incredibly satisfying on its own, however, so it kind of works out. Well, actually, the final boss of Kirby 64, I don't really enjoy that boss at all, aside from the music, which doesn't really count. So, there's that. Then, in games like Squeak Squad, you had treasures, which didn't really do much of anything. But by the time you get to Return to Dreamland, they came up with a system, and that system was quite simply, there are a few hidden collectibles and a level. If you got all of them in a given world, then you would unlock an extra level within that world. And that would be how it would work for the subsequent 2 games on the 3DS, right? This system doesn't fully work because it demands 100% completion of a world in order to unlock something, and so there's no point in getting most of them. You need to get all of them in order to get something. This is something I talk about in my End is Nigh video, but anyway, so it's not perfect, but it's good. I mean, it's better than a lot of other completion systems in other games, right? So what are the completion stuff in Star Allies? Well, you have the switch, which unlocks a level, like all the way back like in Kirby's Adventure, right? So you hit a switch, you unlock a bonus level, right? Sometimes that bonus level is just merely a character selection screen, which is probably the worst contextualization of character selection screen I've seen in a while. The idea is that instead of just friending a random enemy, you can get King Dedede or Meta Knight or some of those cool characters you really like in this area, but it's just really badly contextualized, and it's in this roulette business, and it's just really dumb, quite frankly. So you hit the switch and you unlock the bonus levels, right? And there are multiple bonus levels in every given chapter, right? Especially in Chapter 4, where there are like 4 of them. In Chapter 3, I believe there's 3 of them. And then in 2 and 1, I believe there are 2 each, not counting the character selection switch. I don't think that counts. So That's basically how that works. And then in the levels themselves, then you also collect puzzle pieces, and there are small ones and there are big ones. And the only difference between the two is that they fill in different parts of a puzzle, and the big ones have like a little ticker on the little level thing. So it's like, oh, you got that big puzzle piece, that means something, but it doesn't actually mean anything because it only contributes to this puzzle, which is just a piece of artwork. So what does that mean? That means that anytime you go into a hidden room, you're wasting your time. That because 9 times out of 10 you're not gonna get a switch. You're just gonna get a bunch of puzzle pieces for artwork that you don't care about because you're gonna stare at it for like a minute. You're gonna be like, wow, I kind of wasted my time there. Does that mean the puzzles aren't satisfying to solve? Yes and no. Yes, because they can be satisfying to solve. No, because when the computer solves it for you, it's not very satisfying. It just literally wastes your time. So, that's not good. It would have just been so much easier if they had adopted a system similar to the prior games, though they were not a problem. Did not need to fix that. So there's that. So I guess question then becomes is that, you know, if the whole gimmick of allies isn't really doing much for me, and the collection is sort of just worse, and the level design is bland, then, you know, I guess what makes this game stand out? And the answer is it doesn't. It just plain doesn't. There's nothing in this game that I found particularly compelling or interesting or exciting or anything. Even the final boss was a bit of a letdown compared to prior final bosses. I will say it's probably better than the one from Robobot. The final boss in Robobot is legit like the one bad, like the worst thing about that game is the final boss, but the rest of the game is like so ridiculously imaginative, it's insane. So that's all I really got. Yeah. So I mean, the campaign short is only like 6 hours. So I just kind of sacrificed even more sleep than I really needed to play this game. But I thought it would make me happy and didn't. But that's okay. So that's that. I'll see you later.